Hello, everyone. Welcome to the last webinar in Child Care Works Web Advocacy webinar series, What's Next? Looking Ahead Post-Election. So since it's our last webinar, this slide probably looks very familiar to you all. We just wanted to reiterate our goal and remind you all of some housekeeping items. Our goal for these webinars is to expand the advocacy capacity for CCR&Rs, providers, and family advocates at the state level. So feel free to ask questions via the chat box or question box today. We will be monitoring that. We are recording this webinar, so if you have friends or coworkers who want to listen to this webinar, it will be available soon after. Everyone will be on mute, so again, please type in the question box, and we will have a couple of poll questions at the beginning and at the end so that we can Whoopsies, I was sharing the wrong screen. You would think at the 7th time would be the charm, but alas, it is not. Luckily, those notes were nothing secret. And then, again, we'll have these poll questions. And to join the Child Care Works movement, we encourage you to go to childcareworks.org to learn more. So today, I'll be introducing the other staff members I have with me in the room. We'll be going over the election results from last week and thinking forward about the 116th Congress. We'll be talking about some legislative opportunities for us at the national and state level, and then us on the advocacy team will touch on what you can do, what's next for you all, and then we'll just go over some resources and end with some next steps. On the webinar with us today, we have Chrissy West, the the Director of Advocacy. Then there's me, Lauren Robertson, the Digital Advocacy Manager. Jane Nichols will be talking to us about the election and the next congressional session, and he is the Director of Federal Policy and Government Affairs. And then Jake Stewart, our Policy Associate, will be thinking about some opportunities for what this means for policy. So before we dive in, we want to know who's on the phone with us today. So if you could tell us what best describes your role, we'd love to hear from you. If you're a child care provider or administrator, work at a CCR&R, a nonprofit staff member. All right, looks like we have quite a lot of CCR&R staff on. That's wonderful. If you have any questions about how certain things pertain to CCR&Rs, feel free to chat that in. A couple of child providers and administrators and some others. Wonderful. Thank you, folks. And this next question here, I'll actually share that so we can see who's on. I know it's nice to know who else is on the call, especially when you're sitting at your desk all alone. And next, we just want to know how you all feel about your understanding of the election results from last week and its effect on early education policy. Are you confident, ready to go? Are you unsure? Or are you totally in the dark? And if you've been on one of our webinars before, you know that our goal is to get those folks who are totally in the dark to at least be unsure or confident, and to get those unsure folks to be confident, ready to go. And we hope today, if you're confident, ready to go, you will learn a couple of things from our policy folks. It looks like 25% are confident, 70% are unsure, and 5% are totally in the dark. So we're going to get those totally in the darks out of the dark and hopefully lighten up some of these big election and policy questions for you. All right, awesome. So I'm going to pass it over to Jay, who's our Director of Federal Policy and Government Affairs, for him to talk about the election results.
Thank you, Lauren. And hello, everyone on the phone. It's great to speak with you. Hope all is well as we all begin to prepare ourselves for the upcoming holiday season. So yes, I'm here with you today to just highlight the election from last week, and what an election it was. Over 110 million people voted, which for a midterm election is gigantic. Comparable to previous election years, this might have been the most participated midterm. The highest participated midterm and probably of all time. So there are a lot of voters out there with a number of concerns and issues, and obviously want to remain engaged on policy at the federal and state and local landscapes. So, and that includes, of course, critical child care policy, which our colleague Jake in a few moments will go into more detail on. So I am here really just to provide all of you with the changes coming beginning January 3rd of next year. And the change is predominantly in the House of Representatives, as the Democrats will assume control of it in the next Congress. And as of right now, the Senate will remain in Republican hands. Now, there are a handful of races that have not been decided yet, mostly in the House, but there is a Florida Senate race that has now gone into the recount phase and probably will last. It will probably remain in this phase until the weekend, so we won't probably have a declared winner for a little while. But it is going to be control of the House will be with the Democrats, and the Senate will remain with Republicans. And the two photos you see there are likely to be both Republican and Democrat respective leaders. They are actually holding their leadership votes for the next Congress this week. Some are actually happening today. But Mitch McConnell from Kentucky is expected to remain as majority leader in the Senate, and California Congresswoman and current House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi is the front runner and favorite to once again be Speaker of the House next year. So in addition to that, Chuck Schumer, Senator from New York, is expected to be remain a minority leader in the Senate. And in all likelihood, Kevin McCarthy, the current House Majority Leader from California, is the front runner to be the new House Minority Leader when the Democrats officially take control in January. So we can proceed to the next slide. And while I'm here to discuss really from the federal level the results of the election, we do want to mention a significant change has happened at the state level as well. As you can see, in January, there'll be 20 newly elected governors taking office. There were 16 incumbents also reelected. The Democrats actually flipped or won 7 governorships from the Republican Party, as you see there: Illinois, Kansas, Maine, Michigan, New Mexico, Wisconsin, and Nevada. In addition, there were 6 legislative chambers and 11 flipped Democratic control. And it's actually, this number now is closer to over 350, but the Democrats appear to have gained nearly more than 350 state legislative seats. But more importantly, while the Democrats made considerable gains at the state level, bipartisan support for early childhood investment in child care remains very high. And there are numerous cases, which I know that our team at Child Care Works have highlighted in recent webinar results, but also throughout our other work. And so that obviously remains a priority, even as new governors take office and new legislators take office come January. So the good news there is, while there has been a lot of shifting at the state level, we know that the issues that we all care about still remain a top priority. So we can head to the next. And as I mentioned a moment ago, at the end of as you approach the end of every Congress after an election, there's obviously usually a shift in leadership, and obviously the biggest shift is going to be on the House side with the Democrats flipping the chamber. We do not know yet officially all of the new leadership, but we do know some of it, and we are sharing with you probably the most relevant new committee leadership that affects our issues. And the photos you see here, the 2 women at the top, are members of a key committee, the House Appropriations Committee, which funds child care programs, including CCDBG and Head Start and preschool development grants. The woman on the left is Nita Lowy of New York. She is likely the next chair of the House Appropriations Committee. And then I think many of us know who Rosa DeLauro is on the right from the state of Connecticut. She is actually going to be one of the subcommittee chairs, and that subcommittee is going to be the subcommittee that has jurisdiction over child care programs. The gentleman you see at the bottom, the one on the left, is Congressman John Yarmouth of Kentucky. He is expected to be the next chair of the House Budget Committee, which usually sets an outline. House Budget Committee usually sets an outline for the appropriations committees and the spending subcommittees to follow when writing the following year's budget. And lastly, Congressman Bobby Scott of Virginia. This is the same congressman we presented a Champion for Children Award at our symposium earlier this year. He is going to be the next chair of the Education and the Workforce Committee, and that's important for a couple of reasons. One is that it has the mostly non-funding jurisdiction, or rather the programmatic jurisdiction over programs like CCDBG, but it also is where the Child Care for Working Families Committee this is the committee where Child Care for Working Families bill would have to originate from, and of course Congressman Scott is the House co-sponsor. So it's, Jake is going to provide more, is going to go into more detail on the policy in just a moment, but we could flip forward. And again, very, as I was saying, a lot of we will be sure to share this with all of you, but we imagine that all the open positions and new committee leadership and all committee leadership assignments will be announced soon, and we'll be sure to share it with everybody. And what you see here now is now the Senate side. As I said earlier, Republicans retain control of the Senate, and the two gentlemen at the top are Senators Richard Shelby of Alabama and Patrick Leahy of Vermont. They are the chair and respective ranking members of the Senate Appropriations Committee. They are expected to keep their positions in the next Congress. And the two people listed at the bottom on your left is Senator Lamar Alexander from Tennessee, and of course Senator Patty Murray of state of Washington. They are the leaders on the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, which obviously has programmatic jurisdiction over child care programs, including CCDBG and Child Care for Working Families. It's expected they will keep their leadership positions moving into the next Congress. Other committees that deal with taxes and budget, we were not sure. Some Republicans have put term limits on their chairmanships, and some of them are now up. And on the Democratic side, there might be Senator Chuck Schumer, the minority leader, may move some folks around. For example, Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont is currently the ranking member on what's called the Senate Budget Committee, but he may move to a different committee, and there may be other shuffling. But what we do know in the committee of the greatest interest to us, the leadership will remain into the next Congress. And with that, we have now obviously provided you with the outline of the announced leadership, and now we're going to transition into what this means for policy. How do we move forward into the new Congress? And our colleague Jake Stewart is going to spend a few moments to kind of go through some specific policy items as well as potential opportunities. Jake?
Hi, everybody. Hope you're doing well. So the first thing I want to talk about is the Child Care and Development Block Grant. And before I go into what the outlook looks like for fiscal year 2020, I kind of wanted to review what happened this past fall with CCDBG. So as you are probably aware, back in February, Congress made the 2-year budget agreement for both fiscal years 2018 and 2019. And with that budget agreement came a pledge for a historic increase for CCDBG of around $5.2 billion. And so we were really excited to hear that news, and luckily Congress followed through. Fiscal year 2018, we saw the increase of around $2.4 billion in discretionary spending. And this past fall, as you can see by this timeline, we also saw some good results. So back in August, which was only 3 months ago, but this feels like a lifetime ago already. Back in August, the Labor H Committee, which is where CCDBG is held, stands for Labor, Health, and Human Services. They approved and they maintained the dollars that they increased from fiscal year 2018. And in the following week, at the end of August, the House also maintained the funds. But then in early September, when both the House and the Senate went to conference to negotiate out any differences between the two bills, they added an extra $50 million for CCDBG. Now, I know that $50 million compared to a grant that is many billions of dollars seems like just a drop in the bucket, but we are very grateful that Congress thought of childcare when they found extra money, and we're looking for good programs to put this extra money towards. So a huge thanks to anyone, to all of you who have been advocating for CCDBG, because I believe that that's a sign that Congress heard our voices, and it gives me excitement going into fiscal year 2020 if we can continue the momentum going. Towards the middle of September, it passed the Senate overwhelmingly. At the end of September, it passed the House also overwhelmingly, and then it was signed by the President at the very end of September. So that's just a review of what happened with CCDBG before. However, going into fiscal year 2020, there are some unique challenges that we have that we didn't necessarily have for the fiscal year 2019 budget process. So the first challenge is the rumor that the increase, the historic increase in CCDBG dollars, was just one-time funding. You may have heard from states or administrators that this was only going to be one-time funding, therefore we should avoid long-term investments with this money just in case it gets taken away. That was simply a rumor, and I can tell you that Congress, congressional appropriators, did not intend for this funding to just be one-time funding. Now, as it is with any appropriations process, you can't necessarily guarantee what funding is going to look like from year to year, but we can say that the baseline for negotiations in fiscal year 2020 is going to be what it was at in fiscal year 2019. That's going to be the starting point. They're not going to go back down to the fiscal year 2017 levels. And so Congress had no intention of this necessarily being one-time funding. However, if states perceive it that way, then that could be a self-fulfilling prophecy. So it's really important to continue the message of why the funding needs to be continuous, why maintaining the increase is important to our work moving forward. The second unique challenge about fiscal year 2020 is that the budget caps go into effect. So as I mentioned earlier, in February, Congress struck a deal to lift the budget caps, thus allowing for increases in discretionary spending. However, this year, those budget caps go back into effect. Now, I have this complex chart right here. You don't need to understand the whole chart, but rather just the highlighted portions. The red portion that's highlighted at the bottom there, it stands for the non-defense discretionary funding. That is where CCDBG comes from. It's not, most of its funding is non-defense discretionary. And as you can see highlighted in blue, I have the fiscal year 2019 and fiscal year 2020 budget agreement. And in that purple box is the crossover. And you can see that it goes from $597 billion down to $542 billion. That's a $55 billion cut in non-defense discretionary spending, and Congress is going to have to actively look for programs to cut that money from. And so really how you can perceive fiscal year 2020 is as a 1-2 battle. The first battle is trying to prevent the budget caps from going fully into effect and trying to prevent that $55 billion cut from happening. And then the second battle is for maintaining the CCDBG dollars. And so both go hand in hand, and it makes fiscal year 2020 a little bit more unique than both the last two fiscal years. Finally, one last distinct challenge pertains to exactly why we were hosting this webinar today, and that is with the results of the midterm elections. And before going into necessarily what it means, Democrats, controlling the House versus Republicans, what we wanted to emphasize was the fact that there are many, many new members entering this Congress. In fact, more so than usual. This chart, which I got from 538, highlights the amount of turnover that we're going to see in Congress this year. And this year is actually the third highest year since 1974 that we're going to be seeing high turnover. Over 23% of Congress is going to be new this next year. And that's an extraordinarily high number relative to years in the past. What that means for our work is that there's going to be a lack of institutional knowledge with those new members. They're not going to necessarily know what CCDBG is, let alone its recent history and its full history. But I say recent history because they weren't there for the 2014 reauthorization with the standards that were added. And so it's really important to educate these new members, not only about the importance of investing in childcare and early education, but also in giving them the context necessary to be able to make the right decision, especially when it comes to CCDBG and other childcare legislation. As far as specific legislation, we do anticipate this upcoming year many childcare specific initiatives moving forward. TANF is expected to be reauthorized shortly, and as you know, TANF affects many of the childcare subsidies that that families receive, and so we're going to be looking out for that. We have, as Jay previously mentioned, we have the Child Care for Working Families Act. We believe that that's going to move forward, at least in the House. It could get a markup, have a hearing, and so we're going to be monitoring that closely. We have the Child and Adult Care Food Program, which we expect to see movement on next year as well. In the Senate, we're anticipating the PACE Act to still be relevant. We're hoping it's the same thing in the House, but in the House, the original co-sponsor in the House for the PACE Act, Kevin Yoder, he lost his election. So it would need a co-sponsor in the House for it to move forward.
Jay, can you just briefly describe what the PACE Act is?
Oh yeah, for those who might not be familiar with the PACE Act, it is tax legislation to expand the child care tax credit. And so it was co-sponsored by Angus King in the Senate from Maine, and as I mentioned before, Kevin Yoder in the House. There are more Republicans that co-sponsor the PACE Act, and so it's a great entry point for Republicans to really start the discussion on childcare. But yeah, thanks for pointing that out, Lauren. And then CCDBG background checks. There are some members of Congress that are looking into ensuring that background checks that are required by the CCDBG reauth of 2014 are being met on time. And so there might be legislation surrounding that, although there's nothing been formally introduced. And then finally, we're seeing some new child care legislation starting to enter Congress. Recently, Senator Tina Smith from Minnesota entered in a child care supply bill. And we're noticing that child care is entering the priorities of many members of Congress. Now, a lot of that is because of your hard work, so great job. But we anticipate that there could be new child care legislation, especially emerging on the House side, and so we're going to keep our eyes peeled for that. There's also a couple of indirect issues that still impact the child care and still impact the work that you're doing that we expect to see a lot of movement on. The 2020 census, which historically undercounts young children, and the citizenship questions surrounding that, we expect that to be a big deal this next year. The public charge rule that was released by the Trump administration, that affects how immigrant families are able to access social programs, whether that's SNAP or TANF. And so the administration might be proposing changes to that would limit their access. Some infrastructure bill that may affect child care centers. Paid family leave, we would definitely anticipate seeing that move forward. The Farm Bill, which affects SNAP and WIC funding. In fact, we actually anticipate that might be moving forward as soon as December with the current Congress that we have. And then there have been proposals for the Child Nutrition Act, which affects lunches and food for low-income children, that to move forward as well. Finally, I just wanted to highlight just some child care priorities for each political party, and this is apparent both at the federal level and at the state level. So Democrats are still emphasizing or focusing on access, quality, and equity when it comes to child care. But I wanted to point out with Republicans, there are still entry points to the child care discussion. A lot of those have to do with emphasizing business leaders and their perspective on child care. We're seeing in some states family child care is starting to become really important because a lot of family child care feel threatened by certain regulations, and so that's become a big talking point for Republicans. Existing financial structures, so if you talk about taxes, like I mentioned with the PACE Act, or current block grants, that's a way to enter the conversation. Economic benefits to access to childcare is a great way to enter the conversation. But a big one that I want to point out is that a lot of Republicans are starting to talk about background checks when it comes to childcare. And so that could be a great way to access advocacy around childcare, is by also beginning the conversation of background checks alongside Republicans. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to talk about what that means for advocacy opportunities.
Awesome. Thank you, Jake and Jay. Christy and I always love having them in the room because they're able to really get down with the policy and explain that, where Christy and I then take all that and talk about what that means for you, what that means for advocacy, and what you can do on the ground as providers, as CCR&Rs, and as advocates. So they come with the new Congress coming up, and then thinking about how we can engage newly elected officials, returning elected officials. There are many opportunities to engage with them and reach out to them. So right now is the time to reach out to those elected officials and have them visit childcare centers, have them learn more about early childhood. It's a great opportunity to do education. There's 100 new elected members of Congress, and chances are you have one in your state. So it's not just about the federal level as well. We talked a lot about the federal policy, but also this is a great opportunity to build new relationships with your state lawmakers and governors and those committee members who are now in leadership. There's probably going to be lots of changes in leadership. Thinking about changes in governors also means changes in your state administrator, for your CCDF state administrator. So thinking about how to best engage with them. We have some great resources that we'll have on our resource page for this webinar about how to plan visits to high quality centers and family child care homes, and then how to maximize those visits to really make sure that they're not just going and being like, this is fun and the kids are here, but to really understand the impacts of policies on day-to-day life as an early childhood provider and as a CCR&R staff as well. Christy, is there anything I'm missing in that?
No, you mentioned the one-pagers.
I did. Awesome. And looking at the rest of our webinar series, we've had 6 webinars up to here. So if there's certain ways that you're unsure about, I really want to use social media to engage with my newly elected officials, or I want to be able to craft my story better to engage, or build family advocate networks to really mobilize and engage with elected officials as we start this new legislative session in January or February, depending on where you are. Our webinar series is a great way to start that and to think about how to take next steps. Policy can seem really overwhelming, but we are here as a resource for you and to make sure that you understand the impact of policy. So if you ever have any questions about policy, we are a resource and we can answer questions and help you connect it to actions. For example, right now on our website, on our Action Center, we have a way where you can enter a comment about the public charge rule change, and you can thank Congress for that big that $50 billion for CCDBG funds if you haven't thanked your Congress members yet who voted yes on that, and other actions like that that are great ways. The system we use to send out actions gets updated once new elected officials take office. So to be on the lookout for ways from us to engage your newly elected officials in the new year, because you can directly contact them through our cool advocacy system. So if you have any questions, again, feel free to email us. You can reply right back to the email I will be sending this afternoon, and I can field your questions to the right person. Before you leave, please, please, please fill out this poll for us. It's a way for us to understand what is best what is working for you all, what isn't working, and how we can best serve you. So this question is just a follow-up question on how you feel about your understanding of the election results and its effect on early education policy. It seems, we're constantly hit every day in the past week on election results, but what that actually means for CCR&Rs, providers, children, and advocates, it's hard to put into one slide and into one webinar. Awesome, folks are answering this. Looks like we have no folks that are totally in the dark, and that to me is a win. If you're still unsure, I feel unsure all the time, and this is what I do day to day. So really thinking about ways to get engaged, and any questions you have, feel free to reach out to us. And as this is our last webinar, we still want to know what you want to learn more about. This is our last webinar for the season, but we are looking to do more and more webinars with our research team, with our family engagement team, thinking about creative ways to engage different audiences on different topics. So if there's something you want to learn more about that isn't and listed there, feel free to let us know. Thank you for this comment that in Georgia, I just need a governor. Yes, so some of these election results we still don't even know yet, and so can't even set plans. So once we get those votes counted, those ballots counted, we can take next steps then. All right, thank you for typing in your other ideas, folks. Wonderful, I'm gonna close this. Awesome. Thank you, folks. I'm looking, this is great. So more about building parent networks. Yes, we had parent voices from California on our last webinar, and building a advocate network is a really cool opportunity right at the beginning of newly elected officials. How to help pediatricians use social media, that is a great one. We have a social media manager on staff and in the room actually right now who has been deeply involved in these advocacy webinars, and we'd love to think about creative ways to use social media with different authors and different audiences. Going deep into those state-specific issues, I think that we will see in the next, from Child Care Aware and other folks, really going deeper into those state issues, and so be on the lookout for more state-level support from us as well. And using data maps to inform policy. That is wonderful and great because we have just such a great research team here that really focuses on maps and how to use those maps for change. Be on the lookout. We have an updated report on our childcare deserts, and we're also having a paper on non-standard hours coming out that are going to have a lot of different maps, and we'll have a lot of policy recommendations, and we're really working deeply with the research team to think about how to connect that data with policy and to show where there are gaps in supply and funding and accessibility and affordability and stuff like that. So folks, thank you so much for typing in to the question box. I know whenever I encourage that, I don't always hear responses, so thank you for that. Thank you for attending today's webinar. Again, I'll be sending a follow-up email shortly. Thank you to Jay and Jake for talking on this webinar, so Chrissy and I didn't have to talk about nitty-gritty policy stuff since that's not our favorite thing to do always. And we hope you enjoyed it, and if any other questions, feel free to reach out to us.